Kids, just say no to next gen. You know, we are currently at the point where normally we would usually be talking about next generation consoles, but it just does not feel warranted at this point. And that could be for numerous different reasons. I mean, let's go back through the history of video game generations. A concept that I think is only really known by schmucks like us. I've talked to many of my friends who just aren't really that interested in like following video games like I do, and they're generally like, I didn't even know there were such a thing as video game generations. So to be honest, I'm not really sure if this mindset really applies to the general consumer. I think the general consumer, I think when they see a PlayStation 6, they'll be like, oh gosh, it's a PlayStation 6, I want that. But the general sentiment I see many have online, and one that I do share as well, is this feeling that the current generation just hasn't really even gotten started yet. Which, like I said, I agree with, but it's also like, on paper, you know, it's kind of hard to argue that sometimes. Because to be honest, at the very least, the PlayStation 5 generation is kind of going pretty similarly to how the PlayStation 4 generation went. A lot of people look back at the PS4 and go, wow, oh my god, so many games that generation. And yes, but in the first half of that console's lifespan, like, I almost feel like some people kind of forget the PS4's launch lineup wasn't anything to really write home about. In fact, in many ways, I would say the Xbox One's launch lineup was better than the PS4's. I'd argue the PS4 didn't really hit its stride until like 2016 or so. Before that, a lot of the stuff that was kind of releasing was just a lot of re-releases and remasters and cross-gen titles. But I think around that 2016 mark, not only were we getting a lot of good exclusives on the PS4 and also the Xbox One, but also just a lot of like good games in general. It kind of felt like that generation fully started to like, all right, things are finally off to the races. You know, we got Uncharted 4, Ratchet and Clank, Horizon Zero Dawn in 2017. Now, even The Last Guardian finally released. And honestly, around 2016, that's when I think we started to finally shift fully away from cross-gen titles that were also releasing on Xbox 360 and PS3. You know, before then, in 2015, 2014, we had some incredible games like Metal Gear Solid 5, Rise of the Tomb Raider, Wolfenstein, Dragon Age. But of course, they also released on the previous generations, which I don't necessarily think is like this massive point against them or anything. But, you know, at the same time, when I'm playing a cross-gen game, it is kind of on my mind that what I'm playing is not necessarily like, oh yeah, this is really using this brand new console that I bought. But I'd say around the 2016 mark, I'd honestly say when we saw like Doom release and then onward, I think a lot of the multiplats that we're hitting were like, all right, now we're finally in just the 8th generation territory now. So I'd say we had about 3 years of growing pains, I guess you would call them, for the 8th generation of consoles there, which is pretty lengthy, all things considered. You know, you look back to the 7th generation with the Xbox 360 and PS3, and yeah, so the Xbox 360 launched in 2005, PS3 in 2006. We were still getting games on the PS2 for years to come. Now we got FIFA 14 on the fucking thing. But I think that was a lot more indicative of just how well the PS2 sold, and the fact that the Wii was a part of the 7th generation and shared kind of a similar technical prowess to the PS2. That's why you saw during the 7th generation a lot of Wii and PS2 multi-plat games. But by comparison, there really wasn't any original Xbox or GameCube games releasing after their successors launched. Like maybe for like a year there, but that was kind of it. So the PS2 getting support for as long as it did was more of kind of just like a special situation. The 8th generation kind of normalized a much longer than usual cross-gen period where the previous generation was being supported well into the next generation. And then we saw that even harder with the 9th generation with the PS5 and Xbox Series X. Now, that was even a big point when Microsoft was prepping the Xbox Series X launch in 2020. They were specifically talking how this generation is kind of different, how they're not really looking at this as a generation. Rather, this is kind of a continuation of the Xbox One, I guess. And for a while there, the Xbox Series X didn't really ever have true exclusives. Like basically every game Microsoft was releasing for the thing was cross-compatible with the Xbox One line of consoles. And I think this has always been kind of an interesting debate to have because on one hand, this is nice for the consumer because you're not necessarily being told like, hey, you need to upgrade to this brand new console. Like if you have an Xbox One, you can play all these major games releasing, at least for the time being, on that console instead of having to shell out $500 for a brand new one. At the same time, like what incentive do I have buying the brand new piece of hardware? And the mindset that, oh, if a game is cross-gen, that's not gonna hold back the next gen releases or anything, I think is stupid. Now, I'm no game developer. I don't know shit about how any of that works. But I think it's only logical to know that, like, yeah, if you're creating a game and you have to keep in mind that this game needs to run on 10-year-old hardware, you're not going to fully design the game to take full advantage of this brand new hardware. Like, yeah, you're going to be able to do some nice things with the new hardware, graphically and technically speaking, but no, you need to always keep in mind this game needs to be able to run on ass-old hardware. And like, I feel like every company has said this to an extent. Like, I know somebody who worked on God of War Ragnarok said that, oh, the game was never restricted by the PS4 hardware. And it's like, that might be true, and I feel like they are telling the truth there. They are literally just saying, like, what we wanted to do, like, we were able to do on PS4 and PS5. But it's also like, yeah, this is a sequel to a PS4 game. I just feel like you can't deny this giant cross-gen period definitely limited or at least heavily postponed us seeing what the PS5 could really do. Because for the most part, the PS5 has been a very good graphical experience in my opinion, but when I truly put it side by side with PS4 games, it's not like this massive difference. The 9th generation has felt like a smoother, faster version of the previous one. But here's the thing. I think that's good enough. I have no problem with that because even looking back at certain PS4 games, if I look back at Uncharted 4, if I look back at The Last of Us Part 2, Ghost of Tsushima, Final Fantasy VII Remake, all these games still look amazing. And yeah, the PS5 versions of all of these games run better. The PS4 versions pretty much all ran at like 30 frames per second. And some of these games, like Final Fantasy VII Remake and Ghost of Tsushima, did get sequels on PS5 that looked and ran even better. I think my point is, when I look at all of these games, whether they're the originals that started on PS4, the PS5 re-releases, remasters of those PS4 games, or the PS5 sequels to those PS4 games, I think I just start to think like, what, do we really need brand new hardware? And I think the release of the PS5 Pro really kind of made everybody start questioning that, because the PS5 didn't necessarily feel like it was struggling in most cases. Where some games, oh, you have to choose between performance or fidelity mode if you want to do 60 frames per second or you want to do 4K visuals. And that's kind of a situation where it's like, okay, I guess, like, yeah, PS5 Pro eliminates having to choose between performance or fidelity mode in a lot of cases. And I think my thing is like, yeah, maybe I need a crazy ass TV to be able to see a lot of the differences. I think the PS5 Pro is overkill in many instances. But even when I see where it kind of succeeds, like Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, like, runs really well and looks really good on the PS5 Pro. All right, I'll concede that. The normal PS5 version of that game notoriously had a really rough-looking performance mode. Like, yeah, you get 60 frames per second, but it looks like ass. So even when I wouldn't recommend a PS5 Pro to most consumers, I will at least acknowledge that, like, yeah, like across the board, you get the best running and best looking versions of these games on console. Okay, but then I have to ask, now what? What do we truly need in video games moving forward? Why do we need to spend another $500, $600, $700 for the next piece of hardware to play the next generation of video games? What could these video games possibly do or look like to warrant spending that amount of money and leaving this whole console generation in the dust? And don't get it twisted. These companies, they want to do a new generation. It's not about if it's completely warranted or not. Like, literally, if Sony puts out a PlayStation 6, that's millions of units sold and hundreds of millions, billions in revenue right there. More games get sold. The brand gets like a huge spike in popularity and word of mouth again, all of that. It definitely benefits them in the short term to move on and to do a new generation of consoles. However, I do kind of worry that moving on to a next-gen console when it doesn't feel really warranted just makes it a lot harder to be passionate about what's going on in the game industry, which is something that I've seen happen to a lot of people and something that I felt a bit myself. Like in the recent year or so, I haven't really given a fuck what goes on with the PS5 and specifically the Xbox Series X. I couldn't care fucking less about that thing. That doesn't mean I don't play my PS5. I've been playing Ghost of Yotei and I love Ghost of Yotei. I really enjoy Mafia: The Old Country. I am definitely interested in finally giving Claire Obscur Expedition 33 a shot. But like when it comes to watching the state of plays, I'm pretty fucking spotty with those things, man. I don't give a fuck half the time. So if in the next year they announce a PlayStation 6 and it's going to be the same old song and dance as before, but now things are going to be even worse because if games are already taking forever to release on PS5, you know for a fact they're going to take fucking even longer for the PS6. So then we're going to have another console with even bigger gaps between releases. And yeah, like, I'll get the next PlayStation. I'll always get the next PlayStation. But I think what's starting to just kind of like fade away is this overall passion for everything going on with these console brands, which to an extent I feel like is an unhealthy parasocial relationship with plastic. But I just kind of feel like that kind of love and passion about PlayStation, Xbox, Nintendo is what keeps this kind of subset of being a fan of video games so engaging. I look back to the PS4 era and when Sony did the PlayStation experiences, which was pretty much just these fan events for them to do like a secondary E3 showcase where they go up on stage, they make a ton of announcements, and a lot of these announcements were much more fan focused. There were portions of this where they were like, oh, and this game is coming to the PlayStation Vita, and they showcased like the Vita during a time in which it was even farther past the grave. It was like at the fucking Earth's core. But as time went on, Sony just stopped going to E3. They took a page out of Nintendo's book and started doing the state of plays, and yeah, and now there's like no real major face to PlayStation. PlayStation is just a fucking entity, which is something that you also see with Nintendo as well. Like, Nintendo has faces, and they have a lot of very iconic people related to that company. Most of them are developers that kind of turned into like more so figureheads at the company, but Nintendo has also been going in that direction as well, where they don't really want to lean into like, oh, focusing so much on their presidents or the super big business guys there. Like, those guys kind of take more of a back seat now, which is fine. I mean, I don't need Doug Bowser patronizingly pretending to tell me how much he cares about the Dragon Quest 1 and 2 HD 2D remake on Switch 2. I mean, we're getting a little far away from the point. So to kind of bring things back a little bit, this overall shift with these companies feels much more business oriented. And not to say that they've never been like that. Honestly, them showboating their presidents and big business guys in front of everybody created more of a parasocial relationship, if anything. Which, I mean, to be fair, it was kind of a business decision to create this kind of weird parasocial bond between the video game fan and the CEOs, like Reggie Fils-Aimé and Jack Tretton, making me feel like it's just like, oh man, they're cracking jokes on stage. They're just like me. I love this company. Fast forward to the PS5 era where you had Jim Ryan, who actively looked at fucking Gran Turismo on PS1 and said, who the fuck would ever want that? I don't fucking like this shit. We have a new Nintendo of America CEO, and we're not going to hear from her at all. I guarantee you that. Because in my eyes, these companies are kind of just moving towards, if it don't make us money, why the fuck are we gonna do it? Which is why we were talking about next gen, even when it doesn't feel like that makes any fucking sense to do so. You gotta keep coming out with brand new hardware, and I get it, we gotta keep pushing technology forward, but when the technology is getting pushed forward and it costs a piss ton of money to produce, and the results really aren't that much better than what we're already getting out of a PS5, that's when I feel like they need to sit down and get their priorities in check. Across the board, in the holiday season of 2025, video game hardware was not selling all too well, and I think the companies will probably look at that and go, oh shit, man, we might need to move on to the next gen of hardware. And I don't think that's the problem. Do you know how many people are still playing like Fortnite on the original PS4? I don't think the PS5 really truly had like that giant surge of games that, oh, you can only play on this generation of console, and this is a complete must-have. I think when Grand Theft Auto 6 launches, that's going to be a different story, but you know what? That's going to be in like, I don't know, when the PS7 launches. But even mentioning that, I think that brings up another massive problem with this generation. Development times are getting way too long and games are costing way too much to make. And bringing in a next-gen console, things are just going to get even worse. Game development time and costs have reached absurd levels. And I think it just gets to a point where I look at a lot of the games, a lot of the AAA games, even AA games releasing for the current generation of consoles. And, you know, to act like we're not getting fantastic games is, you know, just a lie. We've had some incredible releases this generation so far. But I'm going to be honest, a lot of the games that are releasing and the games that are taking so damn long all look and play so fucking similarly to games that we got 5 years ago. Ghost of Yotei is really cool, but it's pretty much just more of Ghost of Tsushima. Then we had Spider-Man 2, which it's just like I enjoyed what I played, but like I still haven't finished that game because it's just like I didn't really feel a huge drive. Like, I'm just like, I've played this game basically twice before. Yes, this is more technically impressive, but it's kind of, it just feels like more of the same. Even with Nintendo, when Tears of the Kingdom took literally like 6 years to release after Breath of the Wild, and it's just like, yeah, it made sense. There was a lot of under the hood stuff going on with that game, but it's also like, damn, this game took this long, and it looks and runs the damn same. We had Horizon Forbidden West, God of War Ragnarok. Yes, these are fantastic games, but I feel like this generation has felt like it hasn't even really gotten started because a lot of the games that are releasing here are just kind of like more of the same from what we got from the previous generation. Hell, even a game like Astrobot in 2024, like Game of the Year, I love Astrobot, but also that game is so goddamn similar to not only Astro's Playroom, the free pre-installed game with the PS5, but also the original Astrobot VR game. And of course, that's to be expected, but Astrobot Rescue Mission VR on PS4's PSVR literally beat for beat follows so much of what Astrobot PS5 did. In addition to Astro's Playroom being obviously like pretty much the foundation for what Astrobot PS5 is. Not saying anything about the quality of Astrobot, and also most of the people I think that played Astrobot PS5 didn't even play Astrobot Rescue Mission on PSVR back in the day. But still, I'm just trying to make the point that like this generation, while it has gotten started and it has been going on for 6 years now, a lot of the big games that are releasing aren't really pushing boundaries like mad. Like it feels like we're just kind of getting a lot of the same franchises and a lot of the same styles of games over and over again. That doesn't mean that things are like, oh, bad or anything. But when we take a look at the Xbox 360 era, we were getting literally like trilogies and then some from a lot of franchises. Like Uncharted 1, 2, and 3, Gears of War 1, 2, 3, and Judgment, Mass Effect 1, 2, and 3, all within like 2-3 years of each other. And I think it's just making it harder to be super excited when we have to wait 5 years for the next game in a franchise compared to 2 years. You know, and it makes sense. I'm not saying that, oh, these game developers need to work faster or anything, you know. I think a lot of developers already work hard enough. I think these generations just need to be longer at this point because a game developer is only going to get like 1 or 2 games out a generation. Or I think a lot of these projects need to slim the hell down. They need to trim the fat. Because I think it's obvious shorter dev times are possible. It can be done. You look at what Insomniac's able to do with Spider-Man PS4 releasing in 2018, and then Spider-Man Miles Morales releasing in 2020. Now, Miles Morales is more of kind of like a standalone expansion slash side story where it's much shorter than a big AAA release. It obviously reuses a ton of assets, but overall, like, I thought that game came out pretty damn good. Yeah, it was shorter, but it's also like, I kind of want a shorter game from time to time. Sue me. Yeah, I'm willing to bring legal proceedings into this discussion. But I think a lot of game studios are at a point where they don't really want to take a lot of risks. I think development costs have gone so damn high that a lot of these companies are going like, well, we just need to put out what works and put a shit ton of money into that, and then just hope it sells 40 million copies. So then, of course, you have the live service initiative, where all of these games need to just live on for years and years and years. And I'm just like, this is getting fucking boring, and it's unsustainable. And I just don't really see what a next-gen console is gonna do to just tantalize me. With the Xbox Series X and the PS5, ray tracing was kind of shown as like, oh, this is the next big step for graphics. And I don't give a fuck about it. So yes, I mean, like, I can see ray tracing. I can understand that, like, oh yeah, you know, that looks really nice, I guess. But like, the best ray tracing isn't even like, you don't even notice it. Oh, just really good reflections, all of that. And like, when ray tracing is turned off, like, I don't even really notice that it's gone. If technology like this is costing millions of dollars, not only on the development end of things, but also to produce hardware that's capable of producing graphics like that, that's not worth it. And I think games are at a point where if we can hit 4K resolution and 60 frames per second, I think that that's as good as things really need to get. Yes, you could do 120 frames per second, but I'm not currently really at the state where 120 frames really does much for me. Yes, it feels even better than 60 frames per second, but I think 60 is like where a game truly feels great. And I think anything more than that can be overkill. It can definitely be nice, but I don't think it's necessarily necessary most of the time. Now, I've definitely accepted the 4K revolution. You know, I definitely prefer games running in 4K compared to 1080p, but even then, a lot of times games running at 1080p, they still look great. Like, 1080p is still a good resolution, but 4K is definitely where things are pretty much like perfect. And they tried to make 8K work. The PS5 console originally launched with an 8K logo on the box. Probably because in 2020, Sony was like, well, that's the next step. It's 8K. We're going to do 8K. We're going to try to sell 8K TVs. But then, like, nobody bought 8K TVs. 8K TVs are barely in production anymore, even though they tried selling them, because 8K TVs were stupid expensive, and in practice, nobody could tell a goddamn difference. The only way you're really going to notice any difference between 4K and 8K is if your TV is literally like 200 inches. And even then, I'm sure you won't see that much of a difference. And the fact that 8K hasn't really been like adopted by anybody, it's just this giant cycle. Well, nobody wants an 8K TV because nobody's producing 8K video content or 8K gaming content on consoles. But nobody's doing that because nobody's buying 8K TVs. But nobody's buying 8K TVs because there's no fucking reason to buy an 8K TV. 4K is perfectly fine. And yes, I think it's good to keep striving for better, you know, like try to make better technology, make better products overall. But it's to a point where I think like them pushing forward and trying to make better products, better technology for these consoles is more so to just sell us a new console rather than, oh, we have an inherent need for new hardware. So what should really happen here? Because they're gonna make a PlayStation 6, and it really sucks because the only way I really see a path forward is the traditional console getting more stuff like what we got with the PS5 Pro, but more frequently throughout the generation. Now, keep in mind, I'm not saying I want that, but this is what I think is gonna end up happening, because it ends up making more and more sense for a lot of these console manufacturers to just pretty much make their console basically a PC with a console user interface, because I'm sure it'll make things easier for developers to pretty much just make a PC build for their games. And then it's just like, oh, it'll work on the new Xbox, it'll work on the new PlayStation, and we can just slide the graphics up and down based on which model do you have. Do you have the PlayStation 6.1 or do you have the PlayStation 6.2? Well, the 0.2, you can, it'll run a little better on that, and it'll look a little better on that, but it'll still run on the 6.1, because it might not work as well. But I think that's the future that we're heading towards. And it's not that, like, that would be absolutely awful or anything. But if we're going to start getting yearly revisions of these consoles, well, at that point, I think it would be nice if you could just swap out the hardware inside, kind of like a PC. But at that point, then why the f do you have a console then? Just get a PC. But I think a setup where things can be scaled very easily does make sense because, you know, obviously Sony and Microsoft have seen how successful Nintendo has been with the Switch, how excited people are about the handheld PC market with the Steam Deck and whatnot. And Xbox already partnered with Asus to do the ROG Xbox Ally, which is basically like their version of a handheld. But the way Xbox does things, they're definitely just kind of going like, oh, we'll license our name for this, and there we go, we tried a handheld, good for us. But in contrast, it's pretty obvious that Sony is going to take another whack at the handheld market and do something kind of along the lines of the Switch, or at least a new handheld that'll play kind of the modern games but at lower settings, or maybe it'll only play PS5 games and not the brand new PS6 games. But then again, like I said, the PS6 will probably have like 5-6 years of cross-gen releases. I don't know. But I think it makes logistical sense for the next gen to be kind of set up like that. And I'm only saying logistically based on what these companies are already trying to do. Because for me personally, while I see some benefits to this, I also feel like this kind of takes away a lot of like what makes gaming kind of special. When I was a kid, my console was like, this is like my thing, this is my toy, this is where I go for my fun times. And now I don't know, it's just turning the fucking console market into just basically just the computer market or the smartphone market. And I'm not gonna argue with that being like, well, that's not fun and I don't want that. I want my consoles to just be my consoles for 10 years. Like, I understand things need to evolve, but I just find a lot of things that are trying to be done with video games to just not work the best with how video games work overall. I don't know. Because if we're just going to keep on making more powerful and powerful and powerful hardware, I don't think any game is actually going to take some time and just stop to smell the roses and actually make the most out of a lot of pieces of hardware. You look at what they were able to do with the PlayStation 3 near the end of its lifespan, and some late PS3 games, damn, man, I mean, they just look like low-resolution PS5 games sometimes. And that hardware debuted in 2006. And graphically, yeah, things keep on looking nicer, but the amount that we're able to see things improve, I mean, it's the law of diminishing returns. I mean, we've been at this point for years now where, like, how much better can things get? Yeah, if you compare certain things side by side, you can see, oh yeah, things have gotten better. But in my opinion, are you really going to look at something like, let's say, Demon's Souls, the Demon's Souls remake on PS5, and you're going to go, wow, things have really improved on the PS5 since then. Like, no, that game still looks like it could have released this year, or next year, or the year after that, or the year after that, and you'd still be like, damn, this is a good-looking game. So while you can keep pushing things forward, that doesn't mean you need to. But it's obvious these companies know that new hardware is exciting to some extent. So, I mean, even Microsoft is going like, guys, don't you worry. We're working on new hardware. And then everybody's going like, what the fuck are you talking about? You haven't even done shit with your current hardware. But then I'm like, oh, silly me. Time is just going by fast. I'm getting older, so I don't realize how much we've truly gotten out of the Xbox Series X. Like, we would have gotten that Perfect Dark reboot, even though that was announced in 2020, and then we finally got gameplay like 4 years later, and then 5 years later they canceled it. But hey, the concept of that was cool. The promise was enough for me to buy the Xbox. And then there was Contraband, which was announced at E3 2021. And then we saw nothing from that game. Then it got canceled in 2025. You can play Super Lucky's Tale from the Xbox One on your Xbox Series X. Who am I kidding? This is why I'm saying no to next gen. I don't want this generation to end. Because it's just that fucking awesome!